of which are hot enough to produce a proper stir fry, which requires something like in excess of 30,000 BTUs. So the biggest problem I see with a lot of people's stir fries here is that they dump a lot of food in their pan at once, and they mush it around a bit. They especially don't wait for their oil to heat up properly, and they have food of irregularly chopped sizes, and they're taking a lot of different types of food which don't cook at the same rate for some pretty simple reasons. So I want to talk about how you can prevent that from happening. Since like the way a stir fry works is that you've got this big concave wok, and you're able to just move food through it really quickly. Since woks for American kitchens have to sit on a flat bottom stove, you don't have that pure circle, which means that you can't move things around really quickly. It also means that you just can't heat your oil that hot. So the way you get around that is by pre-cooking some of your vegetables. So there's like vegetables like broccoli, for example. I'll use that as a case. Broccoli has a lot of fiber in it and a lot of starch called cellulose, which we can't digest. So people put broccoli in a pot and just expect it to cook all the way through. It won't, because the outside will get mushy by the time the inside is actually finished cooking. That's because fiber is a really robust sugar that takes a lot of work to break down. So one way you can get around that is by a technique called blanching. And blanching refers to having a big pot of boiling water, throwing in whatever you're choosing to blanch, be it like spinach or broccoli or I suppose carrots, if you wanted to, etc. And then as soon as it turns a bright green, plunging it into a bath of ice water, which helps any further cooking. And at that point, it's called par cooked, which means that it's mostly cooked and the insides are actually tenderized. You've broken down a lot of the starch. You've allowed a lot of the chlorophyll to be released, and you've also made it a lot more nutritional because you're getting rid of all the, you're breaking down the cell walls enough for you to have access to the nutrients inside. You're not cooking it enough for all those nutrients to go away, which is what happens during prolonged cooking of really nutritious vegetables like broccoli. And so, like, for those of you who don't really remember your bio class is like, this is a plant cell wall. It's got this really rigid structure here, and all the tasty stuff in here. So par cooking allows you to break this open, and then when you then apply really high heat to it later on during your stir frying, you're able to prevent all this from moving out because you're not cooking it for that long. And that's really the trick to doing a proper stir fry. So you can't have vegetables that take a long time to cook raw in the pan. They have to be cooked beforehand, which makes them healthier and makes them actually tasty as opposed to mushy. The other thing you often hear with stir frying is don't crowd the pan, or with sauteing, don't crowd the pan. The reason for that is because crowding the pan drastically reduces the temperature of your pan. And when the temperature of the pan decreases, you can't caramelize it as effectively, you can't brown things as effectively, and things are going to take longer to cook. And the longer something sits in a big pool of hot fat, the more fat is going to absorb, and that's not really good. Like, there's a lot of fat in your food will make it okay, but not if it's greasy. So the way you keep your pan hot is one, by using something that, hey, keeps heat really effectively. Two, you only put in one type of ingredient at a time, and that allows you to keep your pan like you drop like as much as 50 degrees when putting in something cold from the fridge directly into a pan, and that's killer. That's like baking a cake that's supposed to bake at 300 at like 350 or 375. So yeah, the principle of crowding also has another application in the little roasting and steaming section part here. When you put your broccoli or any other water-rich vegetable, which is most of them, in a pan, they release water in the form of steam. This expands rapidly because it's really hot and will cook anything around it. So if you crowd a pan, you have this other piece of broccoli here. Hey, look, it's steaming the other piece of broccoli too. And suddenly you have all of your vegetables cooked by steam, which has no kind of flavor and doesn't give you any kind of delicious brown crust. And instead you're just making them mushy. So that's also sort of the difference here between roasting and steaming, is that when you put a pan of some vegetable that you want to roast, say like potatoes or again broccoli or Brussels sprouts in a pan, it is crucial for you to make sure they have some room to play, because otherwise they steam and turn to mush. Like steam has a huge radius from a single piece of food, and steam. The reason I really don't like steaming is because steam cooks things and denatures protein grains and breaks down cell walls without actually adding any kind of flavor because it's water and that's boring. So if you don't want your food to steam and you want it instead to cook as, like a proper saute or stir fry, make sure it's really well coated with oil because oil is hydrophobic. So if your food is coated with fat, it won't attract water. And then also, don't crowd your pan. Steam, however, can be used in really cool ways. In another cooking method I really like called braising. And braising is basically when you have, if you've ever made a stew, you've made it braised, but you have some big pot here, and you've got usually some large lump of meat in there, or large vegetables, and you've got a bunch of other things in here. When braising, you have about this much water in it, like a third of the way up, whatever you're cooking, and you have your lid go in here. You want like as shallow a fit as possible. This does two things. You're braising in a flavorful liquid, usually some kind of stock, or just the vegetables that your water's brewed. The water from your vegetables creates a lot of steam. And steam cooking a big hunk of meat or a big mess of vegetables will cook something effectively while sealing in flavor, because when you heat something, it makes all the pores open. So this happens for us, and it happens for animal flesh as well. And so steaming something is an effective way to get flavor into food, as long as you actually have something flavorful to then get into that food. That's what's really cool about braise, that you cook something at a really low temperature for a long time, and it absorbs a lot of flavor. And if you do it right, it doesn't get mushy, which is by overcooking it. So, and then lastly, frying. I really like frying. I'm going to talk about deep frying here because that's the most fun. Deep frying is really best used with something like canola oil, or ideally peanut oil, which doesn't catch on fire until like 600 or 700 degrees. So you're guaranteed to be safe. And it won't burn until like 500, and when it starts burning, it's not going to taste very good. So what I want to talk about here is the big myth that like deep fried food is really unhealthy, and this is just not true. Because like when you cook something in a big skillet properly, you should be using enough fat to actually make sure that everything is coated in fat and it's going to cook well. That means all the fat that went into that pan you were then going to eat, whereas all the fat you were using to cook with a deep fryer you were not going to eat because it's not going to stick to your food. Deep oil is a really good because oil doesn't evaporate the same way that water does. It can heat really high. You can get it up to 350 degrees or 400 degrees, and it'll still just cook perfectly. It's like the way I've best heard frying being described. It's like building a special frying pan to like wrap around all surfaces of a particular item, and then do that for every item that you're going to cook. And so it perfectly browns everything evenly because it can move an incredible amount of heat into your food really quickly. And when you see things frying, you often see like a bunch of like foam popping up around your like when you make French fries, you have a lot of foam popping up around. That's water evaporating. That's steam leaving your food. As long as you see that foam, you're in good shape. As soon as that foam stops, get that shit out of the fryer, because that's when oil's going to start coming in. Once you have the way that works is that when steam moves outward, it creates a lot of pressure. That pressure is strong enough to keep oil from coming into your food, especially since oil and water don't play nicely with each other. Once that water has left your food is desiccated, and it's really receptive to things then flooding inside it, especially because you just put some poor innocent vegetable in some blistering hot environment where you're ripping its cell walls apart and creating tears in it, and that's tasty for us, but not very good for it. So if you do frying right and you're able to pull it out before your foam stops, you don't absorb any of the oil that's in there because no oil got inside.